Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Vanessa Chase Lockshin, fundraising consultant at the Storytelling Nonprofit. Vanessa is a consultant specializing in nonprofit storytelling, fundraising, and communications, and is also the author of The Storytelling Nonprofit, a practical guide to telling stories that raise money and awareness, and is also the creator of an immersive online training programs for nonprofit professionals. She's helped clients raise millions of dollars, increase a monthly giving program to over 5,000 donors, improve donor retention rates, create donor stewardship plans, and develop winning digital strategies. So we are in for a treat. She has a world of knowledge that she's here to share with us. So buckle in, grab your drinks, grab your snack, grab your lunch, breakfast, whatever the case may be, and enjoy this next 45, 50 minutes with Vanessa. So Vanessa, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Thanks, Ashley, and great to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much for having me. I always tell people anytime I get to hang out with nonprofit professionals and talk about email fundraising is a good day for me. So I'm wondering how all of you are feeling about email these days. I would love for you to share in the chat your kind of, I don't know, check in about email. Have you written your Giving Tuesday appeals yet? Are you feeling good about it? Are you feeling a little nervous about getting into writing and working on your campaigns? Let me know. I'd love to see where everybody's at, and then we'll get into things today. Yeah, feeling a little nervous. I understand that. Feeling like, Kelly, you said feeling like people are really disengaged with email. That's fair. Yeah. And I think that, there is kind of I would say like a rap with email and text these days that people are kind of feeling a little over it. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think like with any fundraising channel, there's still pros and cons to getting that out to everybody through that medium. And yeah, in the middle of writing your email appeals, great. I also am as well at the moment. Yeah, lots of people feeling nervous. Fair enough. I hope that after today's webinar, you will be feeling a little bit more confident about having some direction, things that you can say, how to get started, and most importantly, where to begin with all of this. All right. Yeah, and Beth, I would agree with you. Giving Tuesday, I would agree, does feel like an email overload for sure. And I will talk a little bit about that as we go throughout the webinar, in terms of how to deal with that and how to think about it a little bit differently. Because I say to people every year, I always feel like Giving Tuesday is like a bit of a bloodbath in people's inboxes. Right? There's just like so many emails. There's a lot of competition for attention that day. But the good news, friends, there's 364 other days to fundraise, including many days in December that are still excellent days to be out there asking for donations. So we'll talk about that in terms of writing a multi-email series as well. All right, so things we're going to talk about here today. I'm going to talk about getting more emails open by crafting the right subject lines, sender names, and send times, things like that. We will talk about email design and calls to action as well. So how we can really write and construct great emails that hopefully get us more conversions and more donations through our fundraising efforts. I will also speak to kind of how do we maximize Giving Tuesday as a fundraising opportunity? It is a good fundraising opportunity. Don't get me wrong about that. But how can we use kind of a multi-email campaign concept to really get in front of people and do the right kind of follow-up to get people excited and engaged with our campaigns? And lastly, I'll just speak briefly too about stewardship and how we can try to really retain our digital donors because we put so much effort into all of these campaigns. We do want to make sure that we're doing our part as well to retain them over the long term. All right, so let's get into this and talk about sender names, subject lines, and send times. I'll talk about send times here briefly. Many of you are probably wondering, what is the best time to send an email? It is probably easier for me to tell you what are bad times to send an email. So Friday after like 3 p.m., I never send emails after that time. Everybody is checked out. People are heading into the weekend. Generally not a good time to send emails. Monday, I also find to be a bad day to send emails. All the other times and days, I have sent emails at 6 p.m. on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursday mornings, weekend mornings. They all generally tend to be good times. It's really just about your own list behavior and what people are doing and whether or not you've caught people at a good time. I would encourage you to just try testing and sending emails at some different times to see what works and see if you are finding that you're getting a bump in opens at certain times. But my basic piece of advice would be to send the email rather than fretting about what would be the best time. But definitely avoid like Friday afternoons and Mondays for sure. All right, so I do have more to say, more useful advice though for all of you on sender names and subject lines. And these two are really important levers in email fundraising Because the more people we get opening our email, which is kind of like the top of the funnel, the more people we can potentially get to click on the email, and hopefully the more people we can get over to our donation page. So each of those phases of the email and like places where people can engage with our email and our fundraising campaign, we're hoping to maximize those points of engagement so that we can hopefully get the most donations out of that. All right, so let's talk about sender name. These are really important. And this is kind of, again, like one of the first points of interaction people are going to have with your email is the subject line and sender name. Most organizations will send from their organization name. Like you are a food bank, it's whatever your food bank name is, maybe you're a YMCA, things like that. The thing that I would remind all of you is that people tend to open emails from people, and people build relationships with people more than they build relationships with organizations. And so I often recommend to my clients to have kind of a list of 3 to 4 sender names that they can rotate over time. Usually this will be the executive director, it will be the organization's name, and like maybe 1 or 2 other key people within the organization, like a programs director or maybe the fundraising director, who will also be signatories on an email from time to time. But the idea is that we can kind of rotate these through to keep things fresh, but also that people can come to recognize names of people at your organization. It can put names and faces to who your organization is and who is behind it, which is really important. And I wish I had cited this for you all. I don't know what happened to my citation there, but 45.9% of emails are open because of the sender name. So it is a really important kind of factor in people's decision to open up an email. Um, and some of you might think, well, like we've never sent one from our executive director. Are people going to open that? You probably will get higher opens that first time because people might be curious, especially if you have a subject line that makes a reference to your organization. People will be like, oh, who's this person? Why are they emailing me from this organization? Like you might actually see a bump in from that, which is always a good thing. All right, let's talk about subject lines. I'm curious to hear from you all, and you can tell me in the chat, what kind of subject lines make you want to open an email? And I'll open the chat here. I'll give you all a chance to think about maybe what emails you opened this morning that kind of caught your attention, things that you've seen recently that were exciting. Hmm. Okay, yeah. So again, a good story into that. That's a really excellent one. Um, Robbie, I'll tell you what I dislike, all caps. Fair enough. I don't like that either. So it's a little intense. Time sensitive. Yeah, Cindy, I think that that's a good one. And I'd also say like immediacy, urgency, all of those things can definitely drive people to open an email depending on what it is. Questions, it's personal, action oriented. Great. Yeah, I think these are all really good examples. You all know some of the things that can really pique people's interest in subject lines. I would say as you work on writing your own subject lines, don't discount that experience and that knowledge that you already have. You probably have a sense of what can work for subject lines, and it's just a matter of kind of really getting the words in the right order and making sure that you write something really fantastic. So let me give you a couple of guidelines that I have for writing subject lines. First and foremost, I often avoid the words Giving Tuesday in an email. And let me tell you why. I feel like this is one of my more hot takes as a consultant and an email writer. I do find that like when I have searched my inbox on Giving Tuesday and in the days after, so many emails that I get from nonprofits do have the words "It's Giving Tuesday" or "Giving Tuesday" in the subject line. For me as a donor, I don't find that particularly compelling or exciting. I know it's exciting for the nonprofit, it's exciting for all of us because it's a big fundraising day, but Giving Tuesday is the thing that we want people to participate in. It's not necessarily the thing that's going to pique their interest. What's going to pique their interest is more of the impact and the thing that they can be a part of in the campaign itself. So rather than competing with a bunch of emails that are going out that day that have a Giving Tuesday subject line, I try to take a slightly different approach. And it's the same approach I take with most of my fundraising emails, which is that I try to be just vague enough to be interesting. And some of you kind of captured that a little bit in what you shared in the chat, which is kind of piquing people's interest in some way, shape, or form. I typically allude to a problem or some impact that people are going to read more about in that email. And I'm going to show you some examples here on the next slide. But the other thing that I'll say too is, writing like a person. This is a big part of how we can write in a way that's conversational and engaging and connecting to people through email. There is, I don't know, like nothing more annoying than like getting stuff that does not really sound that personal to you or doesn't sound like a conversation somebody's going to have with you. And I think that we can bring that element into our writing in fundraising. So let me give you some examples of some subject lines. So if you've ever been on a webinar with me before, I've talked about this first subject line many times over in the last 5 years. It is one of the best subject lines that I have written in terms of open rates, and certainly one of the best performing fundraising emails I ever sent. And it is parents can't keep up with these costs. So this fits that just vague enough to be interesting guideline to a T. We have a subject in this email. We know who we're going to talk about, parents. We have somebody that, we're kind of nodding to. We have a problem, some costs that they can't keep up to. But the word these keeps that just vague enough where you're kind of wondering what's going on here? What's the story? And that's true again in the third bullet point here on this slide as well. New moms shouldn't have to go through this. That kind of format echoes that a little bit as well. Like we know who we're talking on through something presumably difficult because we're saying they shouldn't go through it. And so again, kind of this like, well, what's the story there? What's happening for this group of people? Those two subject lines, the first one and the third, are really good examples of that. And feel free to swipe this formula if you want to try it with your organization as well. But I find that that's a really good way of getting at what we're going to talk about in email and getting people engaged and invested right off the bat. I know some of you also mentioned celebratory, like upbeat, optimistic subject lines. I agree with you. I think those are really great too. And so the other three that are on here are some examples that I pulled from campaigns that I've run in the last couple of years. I really liked that second one, the difference you can make, did relatively well for one of our plans last year. And so rather than making it about like the problem and the people that the nonprofit's helping, we're talking directly to the donor instead. They are the subject of the subject line. And we're talking about a difference that they can make and right now. So there's some sense of immediacy and urgency there. But I think that the thing that that one and then the fourth and the fifth subject lines on this slide do really well is they echo or mirror back our desire to have like some confirmation bias that we are good people and we're doing good things in the world, right? And so you can kind of mirror that value back to your donors in some of your subject lines. So for instance, that last one wonderful thing you can do today. Like who doesn't want to do one wonderful thing today, right? It's an easy one to say yes to. And then the fourth one that I'll just speak to you real quick. Vanessa, you can help us cross the finish line today. I always tell people with fundraising, everybody loves to support a winner. And it's just like a really great principle to have in your back pocket. If you are close to your fundraising goal, this is a really good type of subject line to send. Like if you're within like very quick distance of getting to that, you feel confident that with like sending another email, you'll cross the finish line of your campaign. This is a really great take for your fundraising email to just remind people you're super close. They can help you cross the finish line is something really great that they can do. That one tends to also really work quite well for folks as well. All right, so carry on here. Talk about designing emails for clicks and conversions. And if you were kind of newer to digital fundraising and you never heard the word conversion before, this just means the number of people who have made a donation. It's kind of the metric, the KPI, the key performance indicator that we use when we calculate the number of people who have gone through the process to make a donation. So measure the conversion rate on an email. How many donations did we convert through that particular email? So what I will say to you all about this is that there are lots of ways to write and send emails. I'm going to show you one way that I do it professionally that's worked very well for my clients in the last 10 years. And I will also just give you some general tips around formatting emails, some do's and don'ts for that. And then we'll also talk about kind of how to think about the format and layout of what you say and how you say it within the email. For those of you who are like, I don't know where to start, or not sure like what to say in this email, I hope that this section will give you some really good kind of tips and ideas of where to get started with your email. Okay, so we'll start with, I think, some of the lower hanging fruit in fundraising emails, which is kind of the strategic formatting and design within the email itself. So number one, short paragraphs only, no walls of text. This is a really important one, especially if you think about like the size of your phone screen, like it's tiny, right? So if somebody has written a paragraph that's like 8 sentences in an email, it is not very skimmable on a phone screen, which is how a lot of people are engaging with our emails these days. I write paragraphs anywhere between 1 sentence to 3 sentences max I try really hard to keep it in that ballpark. Sometimes I do have a paragraph that is like literally only one sentence. And that's because it's easy to skim. And I want to keep people moving down the email and hopefully continuing to read. And that's also the same reason I use strategic bolding within an email as well. If I'm writing a longer email, let's say something that's like in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 words, like that's a decent amount of text in an email. I know people are going to skim that. So I want to bold some strategic pieces of that email where if people only read the bolding as they were moving along, they're catching enough of the gist of the email that hopefully they will also be compelled to click on the call to action that we have in that email. All right, possibly the most important principle of all for fundraising is that we really do want to have one clear call to action. I know it's tempting sometimes when we email our audiences to just want to like put all the calls to action in the email all at one time. But really, to be the most successful in fundraising, being focused on the one fundraising call to action you have is the best plan and the best idea. And the last thing, and I'll show you examples of all this on the next slide here, hyperlinking entire sentences, not just a few words. This is, I think, a really important one. Again, if you think about like how little a phone screen is, if you only hyperlinked the words like donate now in your email, it would be really easy to miss that. Like as you're like kind of flipping, like scrolling through the phone, like the email pretty quickly. It's also hard to find, like it's not super obvious. And so the thing that I did probably about 8 years ago now that I noticed made the biggest difference for clients' emails was really going to a model where we hyperlink entire sentences in an email. So it's extremely easy to find that. So let me show you an example. So you can see here in this email, there is a line a little ways down. It's blue, it's in bold. That is the call to action, the clickable call to action. It is very easy to find in this email. It stands out. And also on mobile, it was extremely easy for people to find as well. But in terms of like skimmable, readable, this email kind of fits that bill pretty well, right? So we can see short paragraphs. We've used bulleting here to also make it pretty easy for people to look at this. A little bit of bolding, not much here, and then also including a call to action button as well. I do use buttons and hyperlinks. I think that they're both great and can help you just hopefully capture a few more donations along the way. All right. Let me talk about the structure of a fundraising email real quick here. So this is really my area of expertise in email fundraising. I have probably written hundreds of fundraising emails at this point in my career, if not like close to 1,000. And this is what I really focus on in my day to day. And my work is writing these types of emails for plans. And this is a structure that I have found works really well for fundraising emails. I'm excited to share this with you if you're kind of just like don't know where to start. And the thing that I'll say, and I always tell everybody before I get into this, is that I really do think that learning how to write good fundraising emails is a very learnable skill. I think a lot of people get intimidated by writing, thinking, well, like they don't know what to say. It's going to sound awkward. Like, you do not have to be a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist to write good fundraising emails. And I feel like I know that from my own personal experience of 15 years and now to digital fundraising. I did not know what I was doing when I started, but with a lot of practice, with good feedback partners, with people who can really help you in an editing process, you can really write good fundraising copy. And the more you do it, the more you will build that. That is the thing that I think is most important to remember. So that's my soapbox about how everybody can be a good writer. Let's talk about how we can actually write good fundraising emails. So these are kind of the 5 parts of the email. I'll show you an example of an email here on the next 2 slides, and then I'll also give you some more specific tips for each of these parts of the email. But basically what we're going to do is we have a hook at the beginning of our email. That's usually the first 1 to 2 sentences where we're really trying to get people into the email itself. As an email writer, this is where I spend most of my time writing refining the part of the email. It is really important because we want to capture people's attention quickly in that email. And so, I want to make sure that we've done a good job introducing the problem or the stakes that will get people reading. And I would say the mistake I see people often make in fundraising emails is that they think that the most compelling information that they have to say about their cause, they have to build up to it. Like it has to be kind of like the crescendo in the middle of the email right before they get to the ask. No, no, no. We don't have to do that in email because we are really strapped for people's time and attention here. We don't want to bury that lead way down in the middle. And so often I get emails in my inbox that I look at and that nugget right there, like 3 paragraphs in the middle of the paragraph, is really good. And that actually would have been the better part to lead with in the fundraising email. So as you write your own emails and you think about like, how could I make this better? What else could I do differently here? One of the questions to ask yourself is just like looking through that email, is the most important, compelling, emotional piece of information at the top of that email, or is it like way down? And see if you can play around with editing and like moving that up a little. So there is going to be an explainer. I kind of just how I think about this part of the email. It is the hook and the explainer. Those first 2 pieces are about 150 words usually in the emails that I write. And the explainer is basically then going to get people to think about like, what is going on? Why is the problem a problem? And helping you to kind of build the case for support and get into introducing the solution, which is where you kind of get into the ask of your email. The ask is a clear call to action, usually 1 to 2 sentences in that email, again, about 150 words in. And then the next part of the email, I always tell people, I think about this as like, we're convincing the unconvinced when we get to this part. If somebody is still reading, they're clearly invested enough that maybe they just need more information. They need somebody to like tug on their specific heartstring, whatever that might be. And so this is where we can kind of get into a little bit more information. We could tell a story. We could give people a really specific emotional example of what we're talking about in the first part of the email. If you are an organization that works in like policy work and you have a lot of like really wonky kind of like in the weeds things to say about policy, this might be where you kind of get into that in the second part. And then we're going to make a second ask in that email as well. And so again, we're just trying to maximize the amount of clicks that we can get on our fundraising ask, which is part of the reason why I do too. But also, I think like part of what we have to do in fundraising emails is we have to give people enough information to make the decision to click on our link. Sometimes when I look at emails, there's just like not quite enough meat on the bones. Like there's just kind of some surface level information, but not the compelling like case for support or theory of change that we sometimes need to get people excited and invested in what we're doing. And so I find with this structure, like usually I have enough word real estate, but not like so much. I can say something meaningful and useful and really get people excited about what's going on with the organization. So let me give you an example. I'll just give you a couple other tips about um, email writing as well. So this actually goes with that subject line that I showed you a few slides ago. Parents can't keep up with these costs. This was from one of my clients for IDBC just a couple of years ago for this campaign. So the hook in this email, I was shocked when I learned that power wheelchair costs more than what I paid for my car. And yet for a child with mobility issues, a power wheelchair can give them and their parents the gift of mobility. And this is just one example of a bigger problem. All right, we got a lot of information in that first paragraph, right? But the thing that was really compelling to me about this hook, and I remember when I kind of came across it when I was talking to the executive director in an interview leading into that campaign, was like this very basic fact that like a power wheelchair does cost a lot of families, and it is a cost that they might not be able to shoulder on their own. And when she was like, yeah, like I just remember being so surprised that this costs more than my car. I was like, great, people don't know that. And that is a great comparable fact that we can lead with, that people can then kind of anchor into a little bit and that we can talk about. So this email then goes on to talk a little bit about the problem, which is that for children with complex healthcare needs, a lot of what they need is not covered by our public health service here in British Columbia, leaving families to try to figure out how they're going to cover those costs. And so, Variety wants to ensure that families with with a child with special needs doesn't have to worry about how they're going to afford the resources and equipment their child needs. So we're kind of really introducing to people what's going on, what the problem is, and how the organization is going to help solve that problem. And then with the call to action, we're giving donors the opportunity to join us in that quest to solve this problem. So this email goes on, and I'm sure some of you are like, this is a long email. It is, I know that. So the second part of this email just tells a specific story about a child who received a power wheelchair from a grant that Variety gave their family. And so again, for somebody who just, wants more information, wants more of the emotional appeal, we can get into that in the second part of this as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about elements of a great hook here briefly. As I said, this is the first couple sentences of your email where you're introducing the stakes of a problem. It really tends to emphasize some combination of like need, relevance, and urgency. I find that those pieces are usually the most powerful in a hook or an email. And the other thing that I often tell people is it puts the reader into like the action, quote unquote, like quickly. So one of the things that I do when I edit my emails that you can do yourself is when I have like the draft written in a Word document or wherever I'm writing, right in front of the first sentence of my email, I'll put the phrase, let me get straight to the point. And if I have not gotten quickly to the point right after that, I know I have some editing work to do. And I'll delete that. After I've done that editing work, I'll take out that little snippet of text. Let me get straight to the point. But that can really help you kind of understand, like, have you taken a meandering path to get to what you need to say, or did you just say the thing that needed to be said right off the bat? That's a really valuable way to approach email writing for sure. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but like gives the reader the most compelling information to hopefully keep them wanting to learn more. And I know you all work at really amazing causes. You have lots of compelling information to share with people. So the explainer part of your email, we really want to establish a compelling reason for giving while building our case for support. So the way that I think about this a lot of times is that we are explaining why this moment is significant and how our supporters' contribution can make a difference. So in that example I showed you a couple slides ago from Variety BC, that like, why is this moment significant for helping families? Well, it's the holiday season. Families already are dealing with a lot of extra costs to hopefully give their kids a really great holiday. They might also just be dealing with like lots of other life costs as well. And they're dealing with a healthcare system that is not helping them to provide for their kids' basic needs. And so that is kind of the confluence of the moment that we are trying to like paint a picture of for them. The other thing that we have to do sometimes is really give people the right information to buy into what we're telling them. And so this is where you, as like the professional, the expert, have to kind of use some of your own discernment. You know a lot about your nonprofit, you know a lot about the cause, and it can be easy to just want to like dump everything into that email and give people all the information to be excited and convinced. But you don't have to do that. You really just need like one or two really strong, powerful reasons and facts that can shape the case for support around what you're saying. All right. And then in terms of like the ask and the call to action for your email, a couple of things that I think about for that. You want to be specific and direct, always the best way to go. It needs to be something more than just donate now. Like you'll have noticed in those examples, and you can go back to these slides after today. They are like full sentences full of action verbs that are clear and direct with people. I also like to just make sure that it reminds donors of their impact. So we've kind of threaded back to people, like what are they doing? How are they going to help? And just kind of like nodding to that again, call to action. All right. So those are like very quick crash course in writing fundraising emails. So I do want to talk a little bit about creating multi-email campaigns because this is a big part of what we're doing in year-end giving. I said earlier to all of you, Giving Tuesday is a bit of a bloodbath in people's inboxes. I stand by that. It's competitive and it's a hard day in some ways to get attention. But this is also part of the reason why we need multiple emails in our year-end fundraising campaigns and in a Giving Tuesday campaign, because fundraising happens in follow-up. And I think this is especially true for those of us doing direct response fundraising, whether it's direct mail, phone banking, email, anything like that. Following up with people is part of where the magic happens. And, if you think about larger organizations that run huge multi-channel fundraising campaigns, there is, as an example, like I worked at a university in my first 2 years of fundraising. There's direct mail, there's email, and there's like a call center doing follow-ups. There are like three ways that university is following up with people during specific campaigns. And so, you may not have that kind of budget or that kind of infrastructure. Most of us don't. But there are still ways to be able to do follow up like that, like sending the extra email or multiple emails to people to get them to follow through on making a donation. So let's talk about just kind of planning your emails here, and I'll also give you some examples of what this could look like in your fundraising campaign. So one of the other benefits of sending multiple emails as opposed to like your fundraising campaign is like only one email, you send one email on Giving Tuesday, is that you have the opportunity over days or weeks to actually build a narrative arc. And that really allows you to paint a bigger picture of what's going on, to give people more information over time as well, right? Like that's valuable to our organizations and the communications that we have with supporters. The thing that I'll say about like kind of multi-email campaigns, the key of this is to be really clear on a key message that is going to be the through line throughout your campaign. You want all of those emails to feel like they have the same flavor, right? Like I have to tell people like building a narrative arc, like we know we have done it right when it appears like it is all one cake. Like we went to the grocery store and we bought a chocolate cake. And no matter what slice of cake people get from that larger cake, it all tastes the same. It basically looks the same. We know we have done it wrong when people are getting a slice of cheesecake, a slice of red velvet cake. Maybe there's a slice of German chocolate cake in there. That's not what we want. Not for these kind of campaigns. We want people to have that kind of cohesive experience as a donor and as somebody on the receiving end of our communication. So as you kind of think about this for yourself, the best thing you can do is just be clear on like what is that one key message that we want to bring through all of these emails, and then each email is an opportunity for a slightly different angle on that key message. So let me give you some examples here. So just as an example, let's say we are a nonprofit raising money for community mental health programs. So this is not necessarily like a counseling program, but peer support groups and things like that. The key message might be something like, this is like very hypothetical. So current wait times for publicly funded mental health care support are 6+ months. That's simply too long for somebody to have to wait to get help. But by expanding what mental health support can look like, XYZ organization can increase access to mental health care and support. Can include peer support groups, education support, employment coaching, and housing coaching. Okay, so that's kind of like the basic idea that we want to bring through all of these emails. So what we're going to do in email one, for instance, we're going to introduce the problem. We want to talk really about the problem, public lead times for mental health support, and we want to really help people understand what that looks like. So maybe we're going to share a story from somebody who has had to wait a long time to get psychotherapy support, for instance. And then as we keep building out these emails, in email two, maybe we want to talk about the different types of mental health care and support and the roles they can play in somebody's mental health recovery. So helping our readers understand that counseling and psychotherapy support are not the only ways that somebody can get help. There's lots of other opportunities to support people in their recovery. And maybe we share the story of somebody who came through a peer support group and that was like a really key part of their recovery experience. And then maybe in email three, by increasing access to mental health care, increasing access to mental health care is the best way to have more positive outcomes for mental health community. So again, just like sharing a story of somebody who recovered from mental health relapse and how getting help more quickly was the key for them. So I would say one of the things that you can think about is your key message is sort of like, think about like a bicycle wheel or a tire. Like it is the hub in the center. That's your key message. And all of the spokes going off of that are your stories and the emails and other communications you need to send during your campaign. And so as you kind of do some brainstorming, really just think about like what are some different angles, stories, perspective that we can share. And some of you might think, like all of this sounds the same, like we're just saying the same thing basically every time in all these emails. That is part of what sounding on message looks like. And it is really hard to kind of distance yourself from that as the person sending the emails. But I promise you that people who are reading your emails and receiving your emails are not paying as a close attention to it as you are. But you do need to repeat yourself sometimes and repeat the key important points to really drive those things. All right, so we're going to wrap up here just talking about retaining digital donors. So the first 48 hours after your donation, that's a really important time, right? So we want to send something immediate, which is usually the receipt and some sort of heartfelt thank you that can go out to people. I like to try to figure out within like 24 to 48 hours some sort of follow-up, warm, personal touch. Usually that's like a secondary email that's going out to people, and I'll share an example here. And also, we want to set some expectations like, here's what you can expect to hear from us. If they're a new subscriber to your email list, what are you going to send them? How are you going to follow up with them? Like that's all really great things that we can do. So when we think about kind of like the post donation journey after somebody has made their online gift, this is usually like kind of a basic outline of what I think, although it's been a long time talking about this. So we want to send that thank you email, and through tools like Bonterra's different platforms, you'll be able to have automated tools like that to set up thank you emails and also set up welcome series that are targeted to specific people based on criteria in your database. But usually after a thank you email has gone out, I usually like to send some sort of like welcome series or kind of post donation thank you series to people, usually 2 to 3 emails over 1 to 2 weeks. I then like to also follow up with an impact update, usually about 30 to 60 days later. So again, just like driving home the importance of that donation to people who donated, and then asking again at some point, right? So obviously that's kind of like our basic structure in fundraising, and certainly with email fundraising, this is a lot of what's going on. So I'm going to show you just 2 examples of the thank you email and an email I got as a part of a welcome series that I thought were really spectacular. I'll tell you why here in a second. So this was an email I got from 350.org, which does climate justice work. So a couple of things I thought were just really good. This was like an initial email I got from them for a donation. The bullet pointed list here is really effective. So your partnership and with your partnership and activism, we will, and then they list 4 kind of bullet things about what they're going to do. And I think that as a nonprofit, what I liked about this, or like as a donor, what I really liked about this was that this kind of creates some kind of like transparency and a bit of authenticity of like, here's what we're going to do with your donation. Here's our kind of like promise to you as an organization. I think this is really great. Like, obviously, your organization might do very different things. You might do a lot of different things, like the breadth of your work might be quite wide. But I think that this is a really good way to think about how can we just like characterize for people like what we're doing and what impact they're going to be a part of. There's something that can be really effective in this kind of approach. So what I really loved though is the next email I got from them that I was not expecting. That came I think like 2 days later. And this was a signed one from their development director, that just wanted to reach out to me and thank me again for for my donation. But what I really liked about this email was down in the second part of the email down here, where they give me an opportunity to be involved in another way. So it says, now that you've donated to build the climate movement, I want to make sure that you're plugged into all of our campaigns, local groups. Click here to check out our featured campaigns and find a local climate action group. So, as you're thinking about just ways to maximize the opportunity of people donating, if you have a next step, whether it's volunteering, whether it's participating in some sort of community program that you run, give donors that opportunity. When they've donated, that is like peak moment in their donor journey cycle. They have taken a really big action of donating. And the chances are they will want to do something beyond just donating. So think about what a secondary call to action can be in sort of some sort of follow up. Like, again, this was an email that I got through like an automated welcome series. Somebody did not personally write this to me, but it's really well written. It's a nice personal touch. And this is the sort of thing that can go far in helping you both retain your donors and figure out like how else to deepen engagement with donors, because they can be more than just donors to your organization. They have the possibility to be activists, to be volunteers, to be board members, to be community advocates for you. And making a donation can merely just be the first step on that ladder to figuring out like what else, how else they can partner with your organization. All right, so we're going to go to questions here in a second, but I just wanted to share with all of you, if you were just looking for some other tools for year-end fundraising, I have a couple of templates and tools that might help you. These are free. You can go download them over the storytellingnonprofit.com/toolkit, and I'll put that link in the chat for all of you. The one that I'll just direct you to that I think might be really helpful is the email campaign planner. So if you're trying to figure out like your key messaging, what you want to say, how you just want to organize your thinking about your campaigns, this is a really great 2-page tool that will help you just kind of get out of your head, hopefully, and get everything organized so you can move on to writing your emails. All right. Ashley, I guess we'll go over to some questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Vanessa, for walking folks through that. Excited to transition to Q&A. We got a lot of great questions through the
Okay.
chat and Q&A, and they're still flowing in. But before we do that, I'll let folks have a couple more minutes here, seconds here to fill in their questions through the chat and Q&A. But while folks are doing that, I wanted to launch another quick poll here, folks. If you are interested in exploring Bonterra's tools and services to help you all write your fundraising appeals, please feel free to fill out this poll. And then once we wrap up today's session, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have one of our colleagues reach out to you to initiate those conversations, answer those questions, and see how some of our tools with their built-in templates might be able to help you all this year, this upcoming year, so on and so forth. So I'll leave that running for a couple more seconds here while folks are filling that out. But let's go ahead and transition to Q&A. Like I said, we got a lot of great questions, so I'm excited to get through them. The first being that is there too much competition on Giving Tuesday? Should we concentrate on other days throughout the giving season?
Yes and no. Like there is a lot of competition on Giving Tuesday, but you do have a good opportunity to fundraise. So I wouldn't sit back and pass on that opportunity. But I think that what I would do is just uh, manage your expectations about what you might get on Giving Tuesday and think about like Giving Tuesday is one part of your year-end campaign, but there's many other days and many other opportunities to do fundraising and send emails. And so focus on that bigger goal rather than just like pinning all the hopes and expectations on that one day.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that day can have a lot of pressure for folks, and yeah, it can be best to manage your expectations and kind of spread it apart the whole giving
Well,
season.
I think the thing that I would say too is that like it does happen quite early in the year-end fundraising giving cycle. Like this year, it's December 2nd. And some of the better days for giving really are at the end of the month, like the 30th, 31st, with the tax year deadline. And so I know in past years I've had conversations with fundraisers and colleagues right after Giving Tuesday where people are just feeling like so demoralized that like it didn't go exactly how they planned, maybe it underperformed, and they're just feeling like, oh, everything is just going to be terrible. It's not. Like just focus on the next opportunities you have to fundraise and remember that like there still are many other good days to fundraise in December that are Giving Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. And keeping on theme with Giving Tuesday specifically, I saw a couple of questions, and I'm just paraphrasing because again, I saw it come up a couple times. But when should folks start their Giving Tuesday emails? Should they start them before? Should they wait until the day of Giving Tuesday? What is kind of best practice there? What insight can you share?
Mm. Well, I mean, ideally you're emailing your list regularly enough, like every 1 to 2 weeks, hopefully, you're sending out an email of some kind. And I would just think about like those emails leading into Giving Tuesday as like the warm up emails that are going out. I mean, and this is my personal opinion, not my professional experience, but like as a donor, I have found it very off putting before when I've gotten an email in early November asking me to donate to a Giving Tuesday campaign that's still like weeks away. So I professionally try to keep that email and that ask kind of contained more closely towards Giving Tuesday itself. Um, but in the weeks leading up to Giving Tuesday, like send emails to your list, like letting them know about your year-end campaign, like talk about what you're going to be fundraising for. Put some first asks out there that maybe aren't about giving to the Giving Tuesday campaign, but about more generally supporting your organization. And I always think about that as just kind of like warming people up and leading the conversation into what is hopefully like the bigger giving day itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this question came from Krista specifically. Krista asked, in regards to sender name, do you think that Jane Smith, for example, would be better than saying Jane from at organization or at company?
Oh, yeah, what a great question. Um, I would try both. I have done both for clients where we'll do like the ED's first name hyphen like the organization's name or something like that. Like I think those combinations can definitely work. They're all good opportunity, like good opportunities for different sender names. But I would just test it on your email list and see what kind of win rates you get on some of those times when you do combos with a first name and your organization name.
Yeah, I know that we test that out a little bit here at Bonterra as well. So seconding that, it's great to test. A question we had come up, especially when you were talking specifically about hyperlinking within the emails, we had a couple questions come up about hyperlinking. Those being do you think that excessive hyperlinking or bolding like marks those emails as spam? Or do you recommend keeping it to one hyperlink per email? Should there be more than one?
Yeah, what a good question. I know lots of things that will get your email marked as spam that are not that, but I have not come across that as being something where I'm like, I'm just kind of thinking about like email metrics that I have from over the years. I don't think I've ever seen an email like where we've sent two links to donate in it be like excessively marked as spam or getting a lot of abuse complaints on it. Um, so I don't think so. But would it get caught in a spam trap? That's a secondary, different question. I have not had that experience with it. But there's lots of other things that will impact like the deliverability of your email. And those are like much more like technical things like your hosting records and DNS setups and things like that. So I would say like, as you kind of think about those things and wanting the most emails to land in people's inboxes, like checking all of those pieces to make sure you're compliant with them is always a good idea before campaigns.
Yeah. I don't think I've had that experience here either in terms of marking a spam with hyperlinking, because I know we do that as well. So that's a very interesting question. Yeah, I definitely wanted to pose it. I was like, wow, I like
Yeah.
both, but very interesting. Another question we have, and this is in regards to incorporating in-person events through your
Oh,
Giving
sure.
Tuesday campaign.
Mhm.
For example, Lydia mentioned that they have a live bowling night, partner donation night as a part of their year-end campaigns. Do you think it's too much to include that in an event email or in a Giving Tuesday email, or should that be a separate email? And that did come up in another couple of questions as well.
Yeah, what a great thing. I personally would probably like, I don't know, maybe this is me personally. I'm not good at like saying yes to last minute plans. So, if the first time I heard about something was the day it was happening, the likelihood of me going to the thing is probably zero. But I would say that you have lots of opportunity leading into Giving Tuesday to tell people about your event and to let them know to get it on the calendar, get RSVPs, that sort of thing. So I would kind of use those earlier emails to let people know and do some event marketing ahead of time. And then I think like on the Giving Tuesday emails itself, if you've already told people about it, a PS at the bottom of your email would be a great place for that. Like, PS, like be sure to join us tonight kind of thing. Like it's not the focus of your email, but it can be at the bottom, which is kind of
Yeah, absolutely. We also had a question come in, and I thought this was an interesting one and one I've never thought about from the nonprofit
okay.
perspective. But do you recommend do you recommend closing out an email? You'll start it with dear name or hi name. Do you recommend closing it out with that signature almost, saying from warm regards, so on and so forth, from either a development director, executive director, or do they just kind of leave it with, a generic footer? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I always end my fundraising emails with a note of gratitude. Like, thank you for supporting our work, in solidarity, like something that I'm hopeful and positive and optimistic, because some portion of those people are going to donate. And I ideally want to communicate some level of thanks to them even ahead of time before they've even made that donation. So usually like that is a little bit of like the outro that I'm like the sign off that I'm using in emails. Like the other one I was just thinking of, like I feel like with the hospital foundation's work that I've done over the years, something like along the lines of like together, our donations can help us like fund the next wave of like women's health research, something like that, where it's kind of like we're coming together, like we're doing this great thing. Like that can be a really nice, uplifting sign off for people as well. Yeah, so like all those things are types of ones that I would do. Hmm.
I love that. I love ending off with like a little bit of motivation and positivity.
Yeah.
I love that. I love reading emails with that too. So great note. This question actually just came in, and this comes from Lindsay. And Lindsay asks, should our social media campaign align with our email campaign? In parentheses,
Yeah.
same cake, which I have to say, great analogy, also made me hungry. And I was like, wow, I would love to bite into a cake with different flavors. But should they leverage that platform to tell a different story, or should they continue on with that same messaging?
Mhm. Yeah, so in kind of like traditional multi-channel fundraising and communications, your message should be cohesive across all of those platforms. The idea is you're kind of creating your own little like echo chamber of the message for people. So I worked years and years ago in Vancouver for a social service organization, a pretty large one there. And we had a huge year-end fundraising campaign in December. We were everywhere in the city, bus shelters, bus ads, TV ads, radio spots, direct mail, email. There was even some phone banking. And no matter where people encountered that campaign, the creative was the same. Like there were the same pictures, the same headlines, the same kind of calls to action. And so again, like it's just this idea that like sometimes it takes people multiple times of encountering a message to respond to it. And so the more consistent we can be in presenting that message to people, hopefully the better off we are, like the better our chances are at getting them to take action on it.
Yeah, I love the consistency. And I think for folks that are familiar with your organization, and they see these different, or they see the same channel or same story, excuse me, coming across different channels, I think it just adds to that like brand recognition of like, oh yeah, this organization is doing this. This is
Yeah.
part of their storytelling, part of their mission, so on and so forth. So I love that. I know that
Yeah,
you
like
can pay attention to that.
yeah, I think like with the organization I was just referencing that I worked for years ago, like they had like we always refer to them as like our poster people for the campaign. There's usually like one or two people who are kind of like the faces of the year-end campaign, clients who have been helped by the organization, and that was part of like making the campaign very human interest focused as well. But also like people would say like, oh, like that I saw that person like over here, like in that
Yeah.
ad, or like connecting the dots of that sort of thing of like hearing the radio spot maybe and being like, oh, like I've heard, like I've seen John from this organization like on the poster, like that's what his voice sounds like. That's him like asking me to make the donation. Like, it can be very convincing and compelling to people, and like there's a reason why multi-channel fundraising and marketing works well. Like it is very effective.
Yeah. I love seeing the Easter eggs across different different channels, and I'm like, oh, I've seen you before. We have a question from Tara, and this is in relation to something that I know you mentioned earlier in terms of like, are folks tired with email and text and so on and so forth? But any insights that you can share for specifically like SMS texting, and that messaging? And I know that kind
Yeah,
of different than email, but a little bit of that similar, it's going to be on mobile. What kind of tips or insights can you share for specifically SMS?
I have none. That is unfortunately not my area of practice. And I'll just be honest with all of you about that. So I don't really have any expertise or insights into that. What I can say though about like kind of feeling like people are fatigued with email, and like this might be true too for text, but I'm not 100% sure. With email, like I think a lot of it comes down to like the quality of emails that we're sending, right? And like, are we always banging the drum that like the house is on fire and we need people to donate now, right? Like political campaigns and PAC emails that many of us get, right? Like we don't need to be that email sender. And I think that there still is, lots of room for nonprofits and organizations who send like quality emails that are relevant and interesting to their subscribers to get really good engagement. And I see that all the time with clients' emails where they are, sending, perspectives on things that are happening in the news that are relevant to what their cause is. They have opinions and they're sharing those. They're trying to add value back into their subscribers' inboxes rather than just being extractive about it all the time. And so, I think for you all, like with email and maybe even with text too, just thinking about like how can we be a good, reputable email sender? How can we send quality content that people actually want to receive? Like, I think that that is the work of email fundraising programs. Like, that is our job to figure out what that is. And it's not always easy to figure that out, but I do think that that is what makes email feel like really effective for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about some of the like houses on fire. And I think that that can sometimes be effective. But like to your point, when you're getting a lot of those like politically a lot targeted messages, and it's always like the house is on fire, it it can feel like a lot. And I think that yeah, you might not want to lead with
Yeah.
that because
Yeah, and I mean, even like with nonprofits who are not at all like in the political space, which I'm sure is most of you here, right? Like to always be like in crisis mode or something is always wrong, like that is a very specific like tone and vibe, right? And so It's like, do you want that to be the experience people have at your organization? And I don't like, maybe it is. Like, I'm sure for some organizations who are doing humanitarian aid in developing nations, like that is actually a useful tone for them to have. But, if you are not that, like if you were a library, like I don't need to be the angle
Right.
that you're taking on things. And yeah, I mean, it's hard work to figure out like what kind of content to send to an email list, but I feel like there's always some kind of good content for a nonprofit to be sending, and it's just a matter of like creatively thinking about what can that be, and how can you just kind of have a stick in the ground around that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, we're coming close to time here. Folks, there are so many more questions in here that we could spend another 20 minutes answering. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I did want to close out with a question from Ravi. Ravi asked if you had any recommendations for software that you use to design your layout of the emails. Now, I will just do a little shameless plug here. Of course, at Bonterra, I'm going to be a little bit biased and recommend our tool to help you all create and design your email templates. But Vanessa, you work with hundreds of nonprofits. Are there any other tools that you would recommend for folks to check out to design their email or email
Yeah,
marketing?
not any specifically, which I know is probably odd for me given that like this is what I do, but I find they're all like in a lot of ways they're all very similar. I would say that the thing that I would recommend you think about is making sure you have an email tool that easily integrates in your database. I have had clients over the years who maybe use a tool like Bonterra or like Network for Good CRM, but then they're like over in MailChimp or like some other email tool and the integration is not easy. And it like, as you kind of keep growing in your work and in your email program, the administrative burden of like managing two different tools and importing and exporting data between them is enormous. Don't do that to yourself. So I would just recommend like using whatever email tool can and does integrate into your CRM. Like that to me, that is like the thing that I prioritize the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, shameless plug on Terra.
Yeah.
But with that, I know we are right about at time. So, Vanessa, thank you so, so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise to folks on the line. It's really appreciated. This was such a great session. I saw lots of things coming in through the chat earlier and now, and it always makes for a great session hearing from experts like yourself. And for folks on the line, thank you. Thank you for spending an hour with us. Thank you for giving Vanessa your time and attention and engaging conversations in the chat and Q&A. Again, always makes for a great session. And so we really appreciate it. We hope to see you at our next session next week. We are doing the last of our Giving Tuesday year-end series webinars, which is the Procrastinator's Guide to Giving Tuesday and year-end fundraising. I know many of us on the line can relate to being a procrastinator, sometimes not the best, but it happens. So feel free to join us. It'll be exactly at the same time next week, next Wednesday on the 22nd. I just dropped the link in the chat. And we did record today's webinar, so that will be going out to your email sometime next week. So again, thank you all for spending an hour with us. Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing with folks on. And again, we
My
hope to see you
pleasure.
at our next session, and we hope you have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye, guys.
Hi, everyone.